the girls who glowed in the dark. Tonight, we explore a place where light was painted onto objects, something small, precise, and used without much thought. In the early 1900s, factories in the United States began producing watches and instruments that could be read in the dark. These objects were used in everyday life, but also in situations where light could not be used, such as during night work or in military settings. The demand for these glowing dials grew quickly, and production became more organized and structured. Inside these factories, groups of workers sat together at long tables, each responsible for applying a thin layer of luminous paint onto small surfaces. The work required consistency more than speed. Each dial had to look the same, and the process was repeated many times throughout the day. The material they used had a soft, visible glow, even in low light. Over time, this glow became part of the environment itself, appearing on tools, surfaces, and sometimes on the workers who handled it daily. This is the story of the radium dial painters. The workplace. Let us step into a working day in the early 1920s. It is morning in an American town where factories are part of daily life. Streets begin to fill slowly as people leave their homes and move toward places of work. Some head to shops or offices, others to workshops or industrial buildings where production takes place throughout the day. Among them are young women. At this time, it is becoming more common for women to work outside the home, especially in factory jobs that require precision and patience rather than physical strength. These positions are often seen as suitable, offering regular income and a structured routine. For many, this work provides a level of independence that was not always available in earlier generations. They arrive at the factory and enter a space designed for repetition. Inside, the workroom is arranged in long rows of tables, each one prepared for the same task. The setup does not change from day to day. Tools are placed in familiar positions, and materials are ready to be used. The environment is stable, allowing the work to begin without delay. Each worker takes a seat. There is no need for instruction. The routine is already known. The day begins by continuing what was done the day before. In front of each worker are small watch dials. These objects are simple in form, but require careful handling. The numbers are already marked, but they are not yet visible in the dark. That is the purpose of the work. A thin layer of luminous paint will be applied to each number, transforming the dial into something that can be read at any time, even without light. The process is repeated many times. The same motion is used again and again, not because it is enforced, but because it produces the correct result. Over time, the movements of the workers begin to align naturally. The room develops a shared rhythm, shaped by repetition rather than instruction. The material used in this process is part of everyday work. It is prepared in small amounts and placed within reach. Its most noticeable feature is its glow, which can be seen even in lower light. This glow is not treated as unusual. It is simply a property of the material, something that makes the final product useful. As the day continues, the work remains consistent. Each completed dial is placed aside and another takes its place. The flow is steady without interruption. The goal is not speed alone, but uniformity. Every dial must match the others, creating a consistent product across large numbers of items. The environment supports this. The arrangement of the room, the placement of tools, and the structure of the day all reinforce the same routine. There is little variation, and this lack of change allows the work to continue smoothly over time. For the workers, this becomes familiar. The same task is performed each day in the same space, using the same materials. Over time, the routine becomes part of daily life, no longer something new, but something expected. The material remains central to everything. It is handled frequently, becoming part of the environment as much as the objects being produced. Its glow can sometimes be seen beyond the work itself, appearing on surfaces or tools that have been used repeatedly. This is not the focus of the work. It is simply part of the system as it exists. The factory continues in this way, day after day, with the same structure and the same outcome. Production increases as more dials are completed, and the system proves effective in meeting demand. From the outside, it appears organized and efficient. From the inside, it feels steady and predictable. The routine holds everything in place. In the next chapter, we step away from the factory to understand how this material entered everyday use and why it became so widely valued. A material in demand. To understand this work, we step slightly away from the factory and look at the wider world of the early 1900s. This is a time of rapid change. New discoveries are being made, and many of them are quickly turned into practical use. Electricity is becoming more common. Machines are improving. Materials that were once unknown are now entering everyday life. Among these discoveries is something unusual. A material that produces its own light. It does not need a flame. It does not need electricity. It simply glows. This material is called radium. At first, it exists mainly in laboratories, studied by scientists who are trying to understand how it works. It is rare, difficult to extract, and expensive to produce. But its most visible property makes it immediately interesting beyond science. It can be seen in the dark. This changes how people think about objects. Before this, if something needed to be seen at night, it required an external light source, a candle, a lamp, or later electricity. But now, objects themselves can carry light. This opens new possibilities. Watchmakers begin to apply this material to watch dials, allowing time to be read without turning on a light. Instrument makers follow, adding glowing markings to tools that need to be used in low visibility. The demand begins to grow, not suddenly, but steadily. There are more situations where this becomes useful. Night work, travel, military use. Any setting where light is limited or unwanted. The idea of a self-lit object fits naturally into these needs. Production begins to expand. What started as a scientific discovery moves into industrial use. Factories are set up not to study radium, but to apply it. The focus shifts from understanding the material to using it efficiently. This requires a system. The material must be prepared, transported, and applied in controlled amounts. It cannot be handled in large pieces. It must be used in small, precise layers. This is where handwork becomes important. Machines are not suited for this level of detail. So the process returns to people. Factories organize their work around this need. Instead of large mechanical systems, they create environments where many individuals perform the same precise task. This allows production to scale while maintaining consistency. At the same time, the material carries a certain image. It is associated with progress, new, modern, advanced. Products that include it are not just useful, but also part of a larger movement toward innovation. The presence of radium becomes a sign that something belongs to the future rather than the past. This perception spreads. Radium is not only used in watches and instruments, it appears in other products as well, often marketed as something beneficial or desirable. The full nature of the material is not yet widely understood, but its visible effect is enough to create interest. Back inside the factories, this wider context is not always visible. The work remains the same. Workers apply the material in small amounts, following a routine that has been designed for efficiency. The larger system, with its growing demand and expanding use, exists beyond the room, but it shapes everything that happens inside it. More orders arrive, more dials are produced. The process continues without needing to change. From the perspective of the factory, the material is simply part of the work. It is handled, applied, and moved forward as part of a larger chain of production. The system appears stable. The demand supports the work supports the system, and everything continues to move forward. In the next chapter, we return to the daily routine and follow how this process continues over time as production increases. The work and the habit. Back in the factory, the work continues as it always has. By now, the routine no longer feels new. What once required attention has become automatic. The workers no longer need to think about each step. Their hands move in the same way, again and again, guided by repetition rather than instruction. The process is simple enough to remember. A brush is picked up, the tip is shaped, the paint is applied, and then it begins again. This method is not seen as unusual. It is taught this way, passed from one worker to another. New workers learn quickly, not through explanation, but by watching and repeating. Within a short time, they move in the same rhythm as everyone else in the room. The material remains part of that rhythm. It is handled constantly, but always in small amounts. It does not interrupt the work, it supports it. Its glow is still present, sometimes more visible as the day moves on, and the light in the room begins to change. Over time, the glow becomes familiar. It appears on the objects being painted, but also in smaller, less intentional ways. A faint trace on a sleeve, a soft reflection along the edge of a table. Small signs that the material is not only part of the product, but also part of the space where the work happens. This is not treated as a problem. It is simply part of the environment. The workers continue their routine day after day without needing to adjust how the work is done. The same technique is used each time because it produces the right result. Precision depends on consistency, and consistency depends on repetition. Outside the factory, the demand continues to grow. Inside, this is felt as a steady flow of work. More dials arrive, more are completed. The process does not need to change to keep up. It only needs to continue. For many of the workers, this becomes a normal part of life. The job is stable, the routine is clear, the work is not physically heavy, and it offers a regular income. It fits into a larger pattern of daily life, repeated across weeks and months. The material remains central to everything. It is used without hesitation, trusted as part of the process. Its properties are understood only in terms of what they make possible. It glows, it works, it allows the final product to function as intended. Nothing more is required from it, and so nothing more is questioned. The system continues in this way, supported by habit. The same actions, repeated over time, create a sense of stability that does not easily break. The routine holds, even as small details begin to shift in ways that are not yet fully noticed. At first, these shifts do not stand out. They are easy to overlook, appearing as separate moments rather than part of a larger pattern. The work continues, unchanged on the surface, even as something beneath it begins to move in a different direction. This is not yet understood. but it is already part of the system. In the next chapter, we move closer to the material itself and begin to understand what it does beyond what can be seen. What the material did. To understand what begins to change, we need to look more closely at the material itself. Radium is not just something that glows, it is active. It releases energy constantly without stopping. This process is known as radioactivity. It cannot be seen directly, and it does not depend on light or heat. It happens on its own, at all times. When radium is outside the body, this energy can pass into the surrounding space. But when it enters the body, the situation is different. The body begins to treat it like something familiar. Radium behaves in a way that is similar to calcium, a substance the body normally uses to build bones and teeth. Because of this, when radium enters the body, it does not remain separate. It is absorbed and stored. Once inside, it continues to release energy. But now, there is nowhere for that energy to go. It remains within the body, affecting the surrounding tissue over time. This does not happen all at once. It is gradual, building slowly as exposure continues. Inside the factory, this process is not visible. The work continues as before. The same routine is followed, the same material is used, and the same output is produced. There is no immediate signal that something is changing beneath the surface. At first, the differences are small. A discomfort that does not seem unusual. A problem that appears isolated. These moments are not immediately connected to the work, and they do not interrupt the routine. But over time, the pattern becomes clearer. The changes begin to affect the same areas in similar ways. The body, which had continued as normal, now starts to respond differently. What was once stable begins to shift. The material that had been used daily is no longer only part of the work. It has become part of the body itself. This is where the situation changes. The glow that once appeared only on objects can now be observed in other ways. In certain conditions, traces of the material remain visible beyond the workplace, carried with the workers after the day ends. This is not something that was expected. It is not part of the original system, but it is happening. As more time passes, the effects become harder to separate from the work. The same routine continues, but the results are no longer limited to the objects being produced. The material, once controlled within the process, is now acting beyond it. The system, which depended on repetition and consistency, did not account for this, and so, for a period of time, it continues without change. The work remains the same, the material remains the same, but the outcome is no longer what it was before. In the next chapter, we follow how this situation begins to move beyond the factory and into a larger response, where responsibility and accountability start to take shape. The response. At first, the work and its effects remain separate. Inside the factory, the routine continues. Outside, individual cases begin to appear, but they are not immediately connected to a single cause. The system that supports the work is still focused on production, not on long-term outcomes. Over time, this begins to change. More cases are observed. The similarities between them become harder to ignore. What first appeared as isolated situations now starts to form a pattern that extends beyond a single place or person. This is where the process moves outside the factory. The situation enters a different system. Medical professionals begin to examine what is happening, looking for explanations that connect the work to the effects being seen. At the same time, companies are asked to respond, to explain how the material is used and what is known about it. The answers are not immediate. The material had been introduced as something useful, even beneficial. Its risks were not part of the original understanding, and this makes the situation more difficult to address. The system was built around its advantages, not its limitations. As more information becomes available, positions begin to form. Workers who have been part of the process step forward, bringing their experiences into a legal setting. These are not isolated conversations. They become formal cases, structured around evidence, timelines, and responsibility. The process is slow. Legal systems require time to gather information, compare accounts, and determine outcomes. During this time, the connection between the work and its effects becomes more clearly defined. The material is no longer seen only as a tool. It is now understood as something that must be controlled. This shift changes how responsibility is viewed. The focus moves from individual experience to system-wide accountability. Questions are no longer limited to what happened, but also include how it was allowed to happen and what should have been known at the time. Over time, decisions are made. These decisions do not only resolve individual cases, they also establish principles that extend beyond a single factory or industry. They influence how materials are handled, how risks are communicated, and how workplaces are structured. The system begins to adjust. What was once accepted as normal practice is now examined more carefully. Processes are reviewed, and new standards are introduced to reduce exposure and prevent similar situations from developing. The work itself changes as a result. The same objects may still be produced, but the way they are made is no longer the same. The system that supports the work has been altered, shaped by what has been learned. This does not happen all at once. It develops over time, through a combination of observation, response, and adjustment. The factory is no longer the only place where the story exists. It has moved into a larger framework where decisions affect not just one group of workers, but many others who will follow. In the next chapter, we look at what remains from this period and how these changes continue to shape the way work is organized today. What remains? Over time, the work changed, but not all at once. The factories did not close immediately, and the material did not disappear overnight. For a period, older methods and newer understanding existed side by side. Some processes continued while others were slowly adjusted, creating a transition rather than a clear ending. The way materials were handled began to shift. Where the process had once relied on repetition and familiarity, it now began to include control. Contact with certain substances was reduced. New tools replaced older habits. The idea that a material could move beyond the task itself was no longer ignored. This changed how workspaces were designed. Distance became part of the system. Separation between worker and material was introduced where possible. Ventilation, storage, and handling were no longer secondary concerns, but part of the structure of the work itself. The role of the worker also changed. Before, the system expected consistency. Now, it also required protection. The worker was no longer only part of production, but also part of a system that needed to account for long-term effects. This introduced new routines, not to increase output, but to limit exposure. These changes extended beyond a single industry. The lessons learned were not kept within one factory or one type of work. They moved into other environments, shaping how materials were evaluated before being widely used. Substances were no longer judged only by what they could do, but also by what they might do over time. The system became more cautious. Testing became more detailed. Information was recorded and shared. The process of introducing new materials slowed, allowing more time for observation and understanding. Legal structures also remain part of this shift. The cases that had once focused on specific workers contributed to broader changes in responsibility. Employers were expected to provide safer conditions. Standards were no longer informal or assumed, but defined and enforced. This created a new balance. Production still mattered, but it was no longer the only priority. Safety became part of efficiency, not separate from it. A system that once focused on output alone now included limits as part of its design. The physical spaces where the work once took place also changed. Some factories were closed, others were repurposed. In some cases, the buildings remained, but the work inside them was different. The original routine, repeated so many times, no longer exists in the same way, but traces of it remain, not only in objects, but in records, documents, and systems that followed. The watches and instruments produced during that time still exist, stored in collections or kept as examples of early industrial work. Some still carry a faint glow, not as strong as before, but enough to show that the material remains active even after many years. This glow is no longer part of daily life. It exists as a reminder of how the material once functioned within a system that did not yet fully understand it. What remains most clearly is the change. A routine that once seemed stable became the starting point for a different way of working. The idea that materials must be understood before they are widely used became more central. The expectation that workplaces should protect those within them became more defined. These changes continue to shape the present. Modern work environments are built with layers of control that were not always there. Measurements, limits, and protective systems are now part of standard practice. They are often not noticed because they are built into the structure of the work itself. The story settles within this shift. A system that once relied on repetition alone became part of a larger process of adjustment, where observation led to change, and change became structure. And that structure continues long after the original work has ended.